Lexington Arch is an impressive 6-story tall limestone formation that perches on the hillside above Lexington Creek on the northern edge of Great Basin National Park. And as much of an adventure as it is getting to the arch, our adventure truly begins at the approach because you're going to have to take 10.5 miles of dirt roads to get to it. While I wouldn't say that high clearance is required, it always makes life a little bit easier. There were some sections along the way that had a decent amount of washboard road, and there were a couple of puddles that we had to drive through, and that can make things a little bit difficult if you're trying to get there in a sedan. Please note that if you are trying to get to the trailhead, Google Maps will get you there, but it will take you on a much more strenuous route. Instead, you should head on over to our website, livethatadventure.com, because we have not only the directions to get there, but the GPS coordinates to the trailhead as well. On there, we even have the GPS coordinates of this very important turn that you need to take, and it's that one right there. Another recommendation that we have is filling up your gas tank before you head out here. While it isn't an extreme distance to the gas station, there's obviously not going to be one out here. After that very important left turn, you will be 1.1 miles from the trailhead, and you will have one more left turn to make just before you get there. This last left should be pretty easy because you can see the trailhead directly from the road. As we arrived at the trailhead, we found a nice big parking lot, and we were the only car there because we were doing this hike in the middle of August and it was very hot. Over the course of this hike, the temperatures ended up reaching the low 90s, and there is not very much shade along the way. Besides the heat, let's talk about the stats of the trail. This hike is 5.5 miles long with 1,263 feet of elevation gain. It takes most people about 2 hours and 49 minutes to complete, and it took us 3 hours and 49 minutes. I think most of that extra time for us was spent hiding in tiny little shade pockets that we found along the way. Although the trail pretty much traces what is left of Lexington Arch Road, AllTrails and these little red trail markers wanted us to keep climbing up out of the wash and then dropping right back down into it. Notice how I said what was left of Lexington Arch Road? Well, this hike used to be a whole lot shorter. You used to be able to drive in another mile, but due to a major fire in the early 2010s and then subsequent washouts, they had to move the trailhead back a ways. Another thing to keep in mind is that since a good amount of this hike takes place in a wash, you need to keep your eye on the sky. Rain can make this area flash flood very quickly, and that's something you don't want to get caught up in. And let's just say that gets a little bit relevant later in the video. Some of the drop-offs into the wash are steep and slippery, so be sure to watch your step. I might say that it's even easier just to stay in the wash, but you need to know when to get out of it. There is this rock here in it, one of the more important points where you'll need to get out of the wash, so you can just keep an eye out for that. Besides the elevation change of dropping into the wash and climbing back out, the trail will feel pretty flat. But believe it or not, you will be climbing the entire time. It's just a lot more gradual right now, but trust me, it's gonna get a whole lot steeper. One of the good things about this trail is that the starting elevation is a little bit lower than other hikes in the area. Here you will be starting at just over 7,000 feet above sea level, or if you're going to hike up to see the bristle cones in Great Basin National Park, you'll be starting at just under 10,000 feet above sea level. And trust me, that couple thousand feet makes a lot of difference. After crossing this little wooden bridge, you should see a tree that V and I nicknamed the Chicken Foot Tree, and this is where the real climb is about to begin. Over the next 1.4 miles, you will be gaining 818 feet over the course of 10 switchbacks. And that is just to get to a viewpoint of the arch. If you want to actually go up to it, it's going to be a little bit more. When we did this hike, it wasn't so much that the climb was difficult, it was the relentless sun exposure and heat. Even though we had gotten a somewhat decently early start, once the clock hit 9, the temperature started to shoot up quite rapidly and things were about to get pretty uncomfortable. This is definitely one of those hikes where you need to bring way more water than you think you need, because on paper it doesn't look all that bad, so we can see how people would get caught without water out here, and help is going to be quite a ways away. In addition to water, you may want to bring an umbrella. V and I kept passing this back and forth for little bits of relief from the sun. As we climbed higher and higher, we were definitely happy to see that there were some trees along the trail. Not anywhere near enough to shade the trail completely, but enough to dive behind for little breaks here and there. For some reason, natural arches always seem to capture our interest, and we're always looking to visit some on our road trips. If you are the same way, you should check out our video about hiking to Pipp's Arch in Escalante, Utah. I'm definitely glad that Lexington Arch was easier to find than Pipp's Arch, because we did a ton of searching to find that one. There's also another really cool arch not far from Las Vegas called the Liberty Bell Arch. That one also has some really cool hot springs nearby that you can go visit. But enough about the other arches, because here we are arriving at Lexington Arch. Some notable features about this arch is that most arches are made out of sandstone, but this one's actually made out of limestone. There are also a couple of odd theories about this one. One is that this isn't really much of an arch at all, it's actually the opening of a collapsed cave. The cave may have been eroded through by an ancient stream, leaving just the natural bridge that you see today. Please note that we are not even close to being geologists, these are just things that we found through our research, so if you know, feel free to leave a comment below. At this point in the hike, you do have two options. Once you reach the bench, you can enjoy the views and then head back to the car, or you can continue on to get all the way up to the arch. Even though the weather was getting really hot at this point, we didn't want to sell ourselves short, we were going up to the top. Continuing on, we'll add another 1.4 miles to the hike with 150 feet of elevation, and you'll have 7 more switchbacks. Please note that if you are continuing on, the trail does get quite a bit more narrow and way more sketchy. So if you're not very sure-footed, I would probably just stop at the bench below. The last push up to the top is quite steep, but at least you have the massive arch up there giving you motivation. If all of this climbing seems like way too much work for you, you can always check out our video on hiking to Natural Bridge in Death Valley. That one is also beautiful and it's way less work. Finally, we had reached the top, and I must say that somewhere between having shade from the arch and the fact that the climbing was pretty much over, it felt glorious. The view from the top is also really nice, and it stretches way out into the distance. We would have loved to have spent even more time basking in the shade of the massive arch, but we knew that the temperatures were only going to be going up. On the bright side, it's going to be almost completely downhill all the way back, so that should make things a little bit more manageable. I think that your biggest challenge coming back down from the arch is not slipping and going off the cliff. This is why we always recommend wearing shoes with tons of grip. After crossing the bridge, you will come to the only climb of the way back, with exception of going in and out of the wash. We were kind of dreading this climb, but thankfully it seemed like it was pretty short, and soon we were back to the bench. From here on out, it should be pretty much smooth sailing. Even though the temperatures were still really high, it didn't seem like it was that bad at all. And on top of that, we were making really good time on our way back down the hill. This was especially true when we started to notice that storm clouds were forming off to our left. We could see some areas where it was raining pretty heavily, and as refreshing as that sounded, we were not about to wait around and find out if a flash flood was about to come through. We were definitely grateful for those little red flag trail markers on the way back because there are a couple of parts where the trail gets a little bit faint. This is also another reason why we always recommend running some sort of a tracker like Strava or using the Garmin InReach. If you prefer your adventures to have a little bit less sunlight, be sure to stick around for next week, because we will be heading deep underground when we visit Great Basin National Park's Lehman Cave. That is a pretty spectacular spot and you're definitely not going to want to miss it. But as for this hike, we could not have been much more excited when we saw the cars starting to appear off in the distance. The first thing that we did was crank up the air conditioner and head to town for a cold drink. And that is going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe because it really helps out the channel. If you have ideas for future videos, let us know. And for all the information about Lexington Arch and other awesome Nevada adventures, head on over to 𝐿𝑖𝑣𝑒𝑇HADventure.com.